Hi everyone, it's Lisa Mears. Thank you for joining me. In my video today, I'm going to show you an amazing brand new tool that you can use with your card making or scrapbooking projects. If you love stamping and stenciling, this tool is the only tool that you'll need to get perfect stamping and stenciling all of the time. Yes, you heard me right. This tool is a multifunction tool, which means you can use it for both stenciling and stamping. The advantage to this is that you can reduce the amount of craft tools you have on your workstation because you can stencil and stamp with just this one tool. This tool is called the Stencil and Stamp Tool by Sizzix. And in my video today, I'm going to show you how to use the Stencil and Stamp Tool for both stamping and stenciling. I will also show you 13 brand new 4-layered stencils from Sizzix, as well as share with you a total of 17 cards that I made using the Stencil and Stamp Tool. So make sure you stay tuned to the end to see all of the cards that I share. I do want to let you know that currently the only place you can get this tool is at Scrapbookcom, and I will have links in the description box below as well as on my blog at lisamearsdesigns.com, linking you to the products that you see in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. So here is a look at the Stencil and Stamp Tool, and if you turn the box over, it does show all of the contents that are included in the box with pictures of how to use the tool for stenciling, as you see here on the left, versus stamping, as you see here on the right side. And there is a large picture in the middle of the box that shows you how to configure this tool for stamping and stenciling. I'm going to go ahead and open the box and pull out the contents. Everything is packaged together in cellophane, so I'm going to go ahead and cut open the cellophane. Included in the package is the Stencil and Stamp Tool, which is the large platform. You also get the Stencil Adapter in green, as well as a sticky grid and a set of instructions. And I'll go over all of these in detail. So what you see on the screen is the Stencil and Stamp Tool, and the green piece is the Stencil Adapter. And you need the stencil adapter when you're working with stencils. The Stencil and Stamp Tool has the top plate, which is called the stamp plate, which is removable, and you'll need that when stamping. And if you flip this over, there is a sticky grid that is included, and this grid is useful for aligning your paper and your stamps and stencils. And I also want to point out that the back of the stamp platform has a foam base so that when you place it on the table, it does not slide around. Furthermore, the green stencil adapter is used for holding the stencils in place while you're ink blending, and when using the Sizzix layering stencils, it works as it comes. However, if you want to use this tool with other brand stencils, you will need to purchase the Universal Stencil Converter, which is sold separately, and it looks like this. So this is a package of the Universal Stencil Converters. There are 10 converters in this package. And I will show you how to use these with stencils that are non-Sizzix stencils. So let's take a look at the size of this stencil and stamp platform. This thing is huge. So I'm just taking out a tape measure and take a look at how long this platform is. It's about 14¼ inches. So look at all the space you have. And if we go the other way, it's about 9¾ inches. So there is a lot of room here to use as a platform for all of your card making and scrapbooking needs. I want to pull out my MISTI just to show you a difference in the size. The MISTI that I have is an 8 by 10 inch MISTI, so you can see that the Stencil and Stamp Tool is a little over 4 inches longer than the MISTI. And notice that I was measuring the actual work surface, not the edge of the platforms. So measuring along the other side of the platform, it's about 2 inches longer than the MISTI, so you can see that the Sizzix Stencil and Stamp Tool is a very large tool. But I also want to point out that the platform itself is very thin. It's only about a ½ inch in thickness, so you can store it vertically on your shelf rather than flat on the table to save space. So I do want to point out that the base of this platform is not magnetic. You can see when I try to put a magnet on here, it does not stay. And that's another difference between this platform and some of the other platforms that have been on the market, is that this platform actually uses a sticky grid sheet to hold your paper and your stencils in place. So the sticky grid sheet does come with the platform, and you can purchase extra if you need more later on. They do sell them separately. But basically what you do is you take off the backing off of both sides of the sticky grid sheet, and then you place it down on your platform. And make sure you save the backing from both sides, because when you're done using the sticky grid sheet, you can always remove it from the platform and attach it back to the backing. But the top of this is sticky so that it's going to hold my cardstock. So if I put a piece of cardstock on here, you can see that it holds it. I want you to notice that this cardstock is a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock, and it actually fits the entire width and length of this platform. I did not have to cut it down at all. And just to give you a better idea of the size of this platform, I have two slimline size stamps from Scrapbookcom. The top one is the slimline snowflake and the bottom one is the slimline floral. And I just want to show you that this stamping platform is so large that it will fit two slimline size stamps back to back on this platform, and there's still room left over for additional smaller stamps. Now the stamp plate, which is the clear plate on top, that is removable, and I do want to mention that it actually has a smooth side and it has a side that is textured. When you're using this as a stamp platform, you want to make sure that the smooth side is facing your stamp. It's the one that's pressed against your stamp. Otherwise the stamp is not going to cling to the top of that plate. So now I can ink up both stamps. I'm just going to put some Distress Oxide inks in random colors on my stamped images, and then I will close that stamp plate and press down really well. And if I don't get a good impression, the advantage of using this tool is that I can open the door to this stamp platform and I can re-ink it and press it down as many times as I need to get that good impression. And once the images are stamped down to my liking, I can remove the cardstock from the sticky grid. The biggest difference between this tool and other stamping tools on the market today is that the Stencil and Stamp tool will allow you to perfectly align your stencils when ink blending. So in order to work with your stencils, you need to first remove the clear stamp plate, which I've already done. Next, you need to use this green Stencil Adapter, and I'm going to be using the Scrapbookcom Winter Cottage layering stencil. It's a 2-layer stencil that has all of these little houses on it, and I'm going to actually be making a Christmas card with this today. So to use your stencils with this tool, you need to determine how much room you need on this tool. So I'm just placing the stencil kind of over the platform, and I'm determining how far down I need to have this stencil adapter piece. Depending upon how long your stencil is and how much room you will need, you can place the green stencil adapter on the hinge of the Stencil and Stamp platform in any one of the 4 rows on the green stencil adapter. So I'm placing the green stencil adapter on the hinge of the platform base, and because I'm not using one of Sizzix brand layering stencils, I will need to use the Universal Stencil Converter. Remember, the Universal Stencil Converter must be used with all other standard stencils. To use the converter, just place it on the adapter and align the adapter pins with the holes of the converter. Next, you'll remove the adhesive liner from the converter to expose the stickiness on the converter, and I do suggest saving that adhesive liner so that when you're done using the converter, you can place the liner back on the converter and save it. So these converters, even though there's 10 in a pack, you can reuse them multiple times. So for my card, I'm going to be using a piece of cardstock from the Christmas paper pad from Scrapbookcom. I cut it down to measure 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm placing it on the sticky grid. Next, I'm going to take the first layer of my 2-layer stencil, and I'm going to overlap part of the stencil on the stickiness from the stencil converter. So the stickiness on the stencil converter will actually grab onto the stencil so that the stencil will not move. I'm also pressing the stencil down onto the sticky grid, and that will also help secure that stencil in place. Now that sticky grid is very sticky, so it actually is holding down the cardstock and the stencil converter is holding down the very top of the stencil as well. That's shown there on the left-hand side. I'm also keeping track of where I've lined up that stencil. You can see that the sticky grid has a lot of grid lines. So by remembering where you've lined up the stencil, when it's time to add the next stencil layer, you'll know where exactly to add it. So I just want to show you here that if I put this platform on its side, the stencil nor the cardstock are going anywhere. It's all held down by the sticky grid as well as that stencil converter. So now you just need to find your favorite inks and go ahead and ink your stencils. I am using the Scrapbookcom Cardinal Red for the houses on this stencil. I'm also using a finger dauber because it's much smaller than a larger ink blending brush, and I didn't want to get it over the leaves on this stencil. So for the leaves, I'm coming in with 2 different colors, the Succulent and the Pine ink from Scrapbook.com. Now I'm done with this first layer and I'm ready to add the second layer. So I remove the first layer stencil and I line up the second layer stencil in the same exact position as the first stencil. I press that down really well, and then I can go ahead and start ink blending. I'm using the Scrapbook.com Black Hybrid ink to color in all of the windows on the houses. Next, I'm going to come in with my white pops of color and I'm going to fill in all of the little berries on this stencil. And when I'm finished, I'll remove the stencil and I will remove the cardstock from the sticky grid. And here is my completed background. I will set this piece aside and I'll come back to it later on in the video and actually make a completed card with this. When you're finished using the Universal Stencil Converter, you can just take that backing piece and add it directly to the sticky part of the stencil converter, and you can store it until you need to use it again. So I want to go ahead and walk through this process another time. I have another layered stencil. This one is from Scrapbook.com. It's the Party Stencil. And I have my green Stencil Adapter that I've placed on the hinge of the platform. And I've also taken the Universal Stencil Converter and I've placed it on the adapter and I'm aligning the pins with the holes of the converter. And then I'm just going to remove that adhesive liner from the converter. And now my platform is ready to go. So I have a piece of cardstock that I'm adding to my sticky grid, pressing that down really well. And then I'm going to take one of my stencils and I'm going to put a little part of the top of that stencil over top of the sticky backing on the Universal Converter, and I'll press down the rest of that stencil onto the sticky grid, so now it's not going anywhere. I'm going to be using some more Scrapbook.com inks, and I'm going to use my finger daubers to apply ink to all of those little areas of the confetti on the stencil. Once I've applied ink to all of the openings on the first stencil, I'll go ahead and remove it. I will take out the second stencil in that pack and I will align it on the sticky part of the Universal Stencil Converter, and I will press that down really well and I'll go ahead and finish ink blending that stencil. Now if you wanted to, by saving time, of course you can just use one color ink, but because this is confetti and I like lots of colors, I'm using my mini ink blending tool and I am just coloring up each one of those individual openings with different colors. So because this tool is, remember, stencil and stamp, now I'm ready to do some stamping. So I removed the stencil adapter and I'm placing the stamp plate back into the hinge. I'm going to be using the Scrapbook.com invitation stamp. It is a very large stamp set, so if you ever are in need of making handmade invitations. You have all kinds of options here. There's also some options that say thank you. So if you needed to make some thank you cards, you can do that with this set. I'm going to turn my platform the opposite way just so that I can see this a little bit better and I can align my stamp a little bit better. So the stamp I'm using is You Are Invited. So I'm just placing it in the middle of my cardstock. I'm going to close the lid on the stamping platform and I'm going to ink this up with the Scrapbookcom black hybrid ink. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some ink to the top of this stamp. And then I'm going to press down that stamp plate onto my cardstock, and I'm going to press that down really well. And remember, if you don't get a good impression the first time, you can always re-ink and stamp again. But I got a great impression, and that's going to be for the front of my card. Now I'm ready to work on the inside of my card. So I'm going to come back to my invitation stamp set. I'm going to line up the stamps Join Us at the top, and then For, When, Where, and RSVP are going to be aligned at the left side of that piece of cardstock. So I'm going ahead and lining them up using a ruler. Once I have everything in place, I will close the clear stamp plate so that those stamps hook to the plate. I will ink them up with my Scrapbook.com inks and then press that down really well. I'm going to go ahead and ink them up one more time, press that down, and then remove that cardstock from the platform, and I will add another piece of cardstock to the same exact position on that platform, and I will ink up the stamps and press it down again. So this is a great tool if you need to mass produce any type of cards. The stamp plate will keep your stamps in place, and all you'll have to do is change out the cardstock after each stamped impression. Now I'm only showing you 3 invitations that are the same, but of course you can do as many as you'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and put these cards together, and I'm going to use this platform base as my workstation. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the sticky grid from the platform base by adding the protective backing and then just picking it up from the platform base and then adding the protective backing on the back side as well. And then I can store this until I need to use it again. So I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to take a piece of pattern paper from this Sherbet pattern paper pad from Scrapbook.com, and I'm also going to take a piece of the pink paper from the Coordinating Solid paper pad, and I'm going to go ahead and back the Join Us piece on top of a piece of the pink solid paper, and then here is a piece of the pattern paper that I chose, and I'm going to add the You Are Invited piece right on top. So the pattern paper is my mat, and then I'm going to add that to an A2 size card base, so the You Are Invited will go right on front and the Join Us will go on the inside. So now my invitation card is complete, and now I want to finish up the Winter Cottage card. So I'm actually going to take my Scrapbook.com gingerbread ink, and I'm going to add some ink around the edges of the stenciled background. Notice I am using my platform as my mat, and I am just adding the ink right on top of that platform. Now I want to show you that I do try to take it off with water, and because this is a hybrid ink, it doesn't come off all the way. And then I even tried using Windex, but what I found to really work with the hybrid ink, and same if you're using an archival ink, is to use an archival stamp cleaner and add that to your work surface and then just take it off with a paper towel. Notice it comes right off of your workstation. So you can actually use this stamping platform as a surface so that if you wanted to do ink blending, you can do it on this surface. Again, that saves you the money from having to buy an additional tool to do all of your ink blending on. I die cut the word Merry from the Scrapbook.com Christmas block words. I added a little bit of tape runner to the back so that it just sticks very lightly to the card front, and I'm putting the outline at the bottom of that card layer, but I'm actually going to glue in the letters that cut out. So I'm actually using the outline as a guide for the letters. I will be removing the outline after all of those letters are in place, and that will just help me get all of those letters straight. I die cut some of the sprigs from Scrapbookcom, and I am just adding them there to the front of the card. And then I'm going to take a piece of twine that I had in my stash and just add a glue dot to the back and add it to the bottom. I went ahead and added that to an A2 size card base, and that will complete this card. Next up, I am going to be using the work surface again for some ink blending. So I just took some Scrapbook.com mint tape and taped my cardstock to the work surface, and I'm adding some Distress Oxide inks to my card front. So I have the Picked Raspberry, the Kitsch Flamingo, and the Sponge Sugar, and I'm adding those inks from dark to light, but I'm not covering the entire front of that card. So once again, I have ink on my work surface, and because this is a different type of ink, this is just a Distress Oxide, I can spray this with water and it will wipe up clean every time. So now I'm ready to use the platform as a stamping platform, so I went ahead off camera and added the sticky grid sheet. I also added a piece of cardstock to the top. I added the clear stamping plate into the hinge, and now I can go ahead and ink up my stamps and stamp them down onto my cardstock. So this stamp set is the balloon animal stamp set from Scrapbook.com. It has these cute little balloon animals, and these are the outline images which I can color. There were also some solid stamps on that stamp set. I also stamped out a balloon, and now I'm going to remove that sticky grid sheet as well as the clear stamp plate, and now I can actually bring my stamps back to my actual platform. And if I wanted to actually take this platform with me to the living room while I watch TV, I can use it as a hard surface to lean on while I'm coloring. So I can actually sit on my couch, watch TV, and then just hold this in my lap as I color my stamped images. So I want to show you that is another use for this stamping platform. I also stamped out the word happy birthday and colored that in off camera. That is from the same balloon animal stamp set. And now I'm just arranging those images onto the card front. There is a string stamp for the balloon, but I chose just to use a black marker and add my own strings. I am going to use a piece of pattern paper from the Sherbet pattern paper pad from Scrapbook.com. Went ahead and cut it down. That's going to be my mat. So I'm going to go ahead and add that top layer onto the pattern paper and then add that to the A2 size card front. And that's going to complete this card. Next, I want to show you some brand new 4-layer stencils from Sizzix. These are coming soon to Scrapbook.com. I will have links for all of these stencils down in the description box below. If you are interested in purchasing any of these stencils and they happen not to be in stock at the time you check them out, make sure you just click that Notify Me button and you'll be notified as soon as they get in stock. I will be stenciling one of these stencils with you on camera and showing you cards that I've made with the rest. There are so many of these, and they are all 6 inches by 6 inches. So this one is the Geo Flowers. There's also the Snowflake stencil. This one is absolutely beautiful. And this one is called Tartan. This one is Watercolor Leaves. Next up is the Watercolor Roses. Next one is the Mosaic Flowers. Next is the Bird and Branches. There's also the Flowers stencil. And we have the Painted Flower stencil. This is the Hummingbird stencil. And this one is the Scroll Text stencil. We also have the Butterfly stencil. And this one is called Dove. So I want to go ahead and open one of these stencils up and show you the packaging. On the back of the stencils, it actually gives you step-by-step picture instructions on how to use these stencils with your stencil and stamp tool. There's also a set of instructions in 4 different languages on the inside of the packaging. And of course, inside the packaging, you get your 4-layer stencil. This is actually the snowflake stencil that I'm showing you here, but I do want to point out that at the top of the stencil, it does show you which layer goes first. So hopefully you can see they're labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's also 2 holes at the top of each stencil, and those will allow you to insert the stencil into the holes on the stencil adapter onto your stencil and stamp tool. So I go ahead and place my stencil adapter onto the hinges of the stamp platform using the butterfly stencil, and I cut a piece of cardstock to 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches square because these stencils are square stencils. They're 6 by 6. However, you do not need to make your card a square card. You can actually cut your cardstock down to any size you want and maybe just use part of the stencil. So on this card I actually used the whole stencil. There are some cards that I have coming up with the other stencils that I did make smaller cards. So I'm just lining up my cardstock on the back of the stencil just to make sure I have it in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and put those holes on the stencil in the stencil adapter. The Sizzix layering stencils hook onto the stencil adapter perfectly, so you don't need that universal converter. Now I want you to notice this little piece of the stencil right here. I'm afraid that if I start ink blending over that is going to move on my paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my Pixie spray, which is a low tack adhesive, and I'm going to spray it on the back of the stencil. And once I spray the Pixie spray, I'll go ahead and add the stencil right back onto the stencil adapter. Press that down really well, and that's going to allow that piece of the stencil to hook on or stick to the cardstock. So now I'm going to go ahead and do my ink blending. This is the first layer of this stencil, and all of the Sizzix 4-layer stencils, again, they have 4 layers, and they are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is number 1 for the butterfly stencil. I'm using 2 different color yellow inks from the yellow group of inks from Scrapbookcom. When I finish with stencil 1, I'm going to go ahead and remove that from my platform. And I'm going to add stencil 2. So all I have to do is add those little holes to the stencil adapter, press that down. Remember, it's going to hook onto that sticky grid, and then I'll go ahead and add some more color ink. Now that stencil 2 is complete, I will remove that, and then I will add stencil 3 right to the top, placing the holes of the stencil into the stencil adapter, and then I'll go ahead and add some more ink. So now I'm coming in with a darker pink ink for the lines on the butterfly wings. And I love how these layered stencils allow you to add different color inks to all of these stencils to create a very dimensional look. I did start with the lightest color pink, and when you're adding the layers, always go from light to dark. You don't want to start with the darkest color ink because then it will be hard to add a lighter color ink on top. Okay, now that stencil 3 is finished, I'm going to go ahead and add stencil 4. I'm going to go ahead and add some Pixie spray just to keep the inside of that butterfly stencil down on my cardstock. And then I'll go ahead and press that down really well, and now I'm going to come in with some blue inks and add that to the last stencil. So one great thing about using this platform is that I can lift up this stencil and see if I got good ink coverage, and if I didn't, I can just take the stencil, place it right back down onto those holes, and I know that it's lined up perfectly every time. So now it's complete. So now I can go ahead and add the stamp plate right into the hinge, and I'm ready to stamp my sentiment. The sentiment I'm using is from the Botanical Borders and Sentiments stamp set from Scrapbookcom, so I'm just going to line it up where I want it, put my stamp plate down to grab the stamp, ink it up with some black hybrid ink, and stamp it down. And again, I can stamp this down as many times as I need to until I get the best impression. And then I just took that cardstock panel and I layered it onto some pink and blue cardstock, and then onto a 6 by 6 inch square white card base. So moving on, I'm going to use this scroll text stencil. It is a 4-layer stencil. I have a card that I have coming up using all 4 layers, but I want to show you that you can actually just use one of the layers from this stencil. You don't have to use all 4. I'm actually going to take the actual text part of the stencil, and I'm going to do some embossing. I put some embossing powder down on my cardstock, And I used the Pink and Main Anti-Static brush to do that. And then I'm going to add some Versamark ink right into the holes of the stencil. I'm going to remove the stencil and the cardstock. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle some white embossing powder on the cardstock. And then I'm going to heat set that with a heat tool. I love how you can use the Stencil and Stamp platform as a work surface. So here I'm spraying some of my Brutus Monroe Chroma Mist onto this platform in 3 different colors. And I'm just going to spritz this with water, and then I'm going to take that background that I embossed and I'm going to dip this in the Chroma Mist. So this is just like a liquid ink, and I'm just doing some watercoloring. And again, this is not going to hurt the platform. It's not going to stain at all. It's water-based and it will wipe right up. So I add more ink because I see I have lots of white areas on this panel and I wanted to cover it completely. And because my panel is still wet, I'm going to go ahead and take a heat gun to it to dry all of that ink. I want to go ahead and work with this panel quickly, so I want to make sure that it's completely dry. And when I'm done, I'm just going to wipe it up with a paper towel and notice that it comes off without a stain in sight. It looks brand spanking new. So next, I went ahead and die cut some of the butterfly dies from Scrapbook.com. These are brand new to Scrapbook.com. I die cut them out of some silver glitter paper from the Mixed Metals glitter paper pad, and I added glue to the center of those butterflies and added some sequins to the center and added those to the card front. And then I added that layer to an A2 size card base, and of course I added the sentiment. The sentiment is from the UR stamp set from Scrapbook.com. So there's my completed card. And here's a look at all of the cards that I made using the Sizzix 4-layer stencils. This one is the Mosaic Flowers stencil. I stenciled it with some blue and pink inks from Scrapbook.com. I added some gems to the front and also added the word thanks from the Thank You word die from Scrapbook.com. This card is the Watercolored Roses stencil. This is one of my favorites besides the butterfly stencil. I added some pink and some brown inks to the stencil and added the sentiment from the Trinity Stamps Simply Sentimental You stamp set. And once again, here is a picture of the stenciled butterfly card that I created with you on camera. This card was created with the Geo Flowers stencil. I added the Havana Red, Carnival Pink, Pink Lemonade, and Ballet Slipper in the background, and then added the Lantern Light, Daffodil, and Honeycomb for the flowers. And the sentiment is from Altenews Sentiment Strips 1 stamp set. Notice I did cut this card down to a A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This card was created with the Watercolored Leaves stencil, and I added inks in orange, yellow, and greens, and added the large hello stamp from the Floral Slimline stamp set from Scrapbook.com. I created this card using the Dove stencil. This stencil is perfect for a sympathy card. I inked the dove in the Scrapbook.com fog ink, so it's pretty light. It's very light. Hopefully you can see it good on camera, and then added some greens, yellows, and pinks for the flowers. And I created this A2 size card using the flowers stencil. So I have some green and blue and yellow inks, and I added the Love You stamp from the Scrapbook.com Sweet Expression stamp set. I created this card with the Hummingbird stencil and also used the sentiment from the Trinity Stamps Simply Sentimental You stamp set. This card I created with the Bird and Branches stamp set, and I added the Just a Note stamp from the Pink Fresh Studio Perfect Sentiments stamp set. This one was created with the Painted Flowers stencil, and I added the Happy Birthday sentiment from the Scrapbook.com Botanical Borders with Sentiments stamp set. For my next card, I used the Tartan Stencil, which is this fun plaid background that I stenciled in red and black ink. I turned this into a Christmas card, but this background would be perfect for any masculine card. I also added the Scrapbook.com nested tree dies to the front of this card and die cut that tree out of the Scrapbook.com Christmas pattern paper pad. I used the Spellbinders Many Merry Christmas Sentiments for the stamp set. For this card, I used the Snowflake stencil with some Distress Oxide inks, and I added some pink gems to the front of the card. And for this card, I used the Scroll Text stencil and added the Scrapbookcom botanical borders with sentiments for the stamp set. So remember, I will have all product links down in the description box and on my blog. So if you're interested in purchasing any of these products, please take a look down there at the product links. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more card making inspiration. Thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.